Black female faculty have historically been underrepresented in higher education. This absence has assisted with perpetuating the implicit biases that are often associated with women of color in academia. These same biases are continually expressed in areas of learning in the form of microaggressions. Black female faculty who endure these aggressions are positioned to internalize the continued messaging that such behavior is both appropriate and acceptable, although these messages negatively impact faculty well-being and retention. Provosts of community colleges must assist Black female faculty in addressing this issue by adjusting mentoring programs to specifically educate mentors regarding the continued effects of isms and marginalized persons' lived experiences, thereby creating institutional support for Black female faculty. Black female faculty have long been underrepresented in post-secondary education. As of 2013, females of color represented 13% of the overall population, but only 5% of community college faculty. This is the most recent data that outlines the historical underrepresentation that helped maintain certain assumptions regarding ability and desire to be present in the collegiate learning environment. The assumptions regarding ability will be explored further in this presentation. But before we get there, we must start at the beginning. In this case, the beginning is theory. Now, before you groan and roll your eyes, just stick with me. I promise this isn't as bad as it sounds. Critical race theory has its beginnings in the legal realm. While co-founded by a number of individuals, Dr. Derek Bell is most often credited with its origins. Critical race theory, or CRT, draws from a wide range of research in the legal, sociological, historical, ethnic, and women's studies worlds. This theory is used as a way to examine and discuss race-based societal issues. Within this theory, there are 5 assumptions that lay the foundation. The 5 assumptions, or tenets, are storytelling, permanence of racism, whiteness as property, entrance conversion, and the critique of liberalism. Let's examine each of these individually. Storytelling, sometimes known as counter-storytelling, serves to detail the lived experiences of marginalized persons, particularly those of color, in efforts to create a narrative that is inclusive of the diverse society. Because we live in a society where the dominant story is one of the white experience, this tenet is meaningful in constructing accounts that can lay the foundation for race-based knowledge, exploration, and when necessary, intervention. Next, CRT asserts that racism is permanent. It is this permanence that allows racism to maintain an insidious presence in the structures of America. This moves the racism conversation from a micro or individual arena to a macro or institutionalized one. It is in this way we can begin to explore the pervasive nature of racism and its continued impact on policy in legal, health, and educational realms, to name a few. Because of this pervasiveness, we do not even realize when racism is present. It has become normalized. The third premise of CRT suggests that to be white in America is to have the right to exclude and possess. This ability to possess has been seen throughout the nation's history, whether we are talking about land, money, or even people. To possess means that one has access to something that another cannot have. In this context, then, we see possession and exclusion juxtaposed. Fourth in the CRT is the concept of interest convergence. This tenet suggests that whites are the primary benefactors of civil rights legislature. Perhaps the most popular example of this is that of affirmative action, where white women have been the primary beneficiaries. Finally, the last idea that serves to create the foundation for CRT is a critique in liberalism. This critique includes the insistence that is often perpetuated in the U.S. regarding colorblindness and the law. The thought here is that the law is neutral and there is equal opportunity for all, and this thought is challenged in critical race theory. So, these are the tenets or assumptions of CRT, and as a whole, serve to encourage interventions that create equity in the previously mentioned institutions. Over the years, critical race theory has grown several branches to address the various types of marginalization that happens in society. One of these areas is education. When applying critical race theory to education, it differs from the other approaches because it challenges traditional dialogue related to the intersectionality of isms. Specifically, it can provide a foundation with which to discuss how gender and race impact the lived experiences of Black female faculty. And we have arrived. Using critical race theory in education allows us to examine how racism rears its ugly head both in and out of the classroom. Through the use of storytelling, we can identify instances in which racism is expressed and address the sustainability of such practice both at the individual and organizational level. Educators are then in a position to use research to incorporate multicultural curriculum into their pedagogies, thereby challenging the dominant story and widening lenses to encompass all lived experiences. In doing this, college campuses are more likely to be positioned to create a shared, positive educational journey. Next, let's take a brief moment to examine biases. It is extremely important to understand that, although pervasive and present, not all biases are intentional or even conscious. In fact, most biases are implicit. As defined by the current institute at The Ohio State University, and I quote, also known as implicit social cognition, implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. Residing deep in the subconscious, these biases are different from known biases that individuals may choose to conceal for the purposes of social and/or political correctness. Rather, implicit biases are not accessible through introspection. End of quote. This is important to understand because even when biases are not conscious, unconscious beliefs can lead to unconscious actions. Speaking of consciousness, we cannot in good conscience end with identifying critical race theory as the framework with which to address the racism and sexism experienced by Black female faculty. Nor can we simply say that, yes, racism is real, but people can't help it because they're not aware. We must also define in detail what these experiences look like when bias is at play. Only then will campuses be able to truly address the issue that is maintaining the lack of Black female faculty representation. So let us then discuss microaggressions. First studied in the 1970s, microaggressions has recently been made popular through the works of Gerald Wing Sue. So what is a microaggression? Sue et al. Explains that racial microaggressions are, and I quote, brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward the target person or group. End of quote. Microaggressions are often unconscious and unintentional and that perpetrators may not realize the negative impact these messages have on members of oppressed groups. Thus, microaggressions tend to be harder to identify than overt racism, more difficult to confront or address, or both. Because victims of microaggressions may have different perceptions and racial realities than those who enact them. Sue describes 3 types of microaggressions that are commonly experienced. Microassaults are those deliberate behaviors and language that are used to insult a person of color. Examples of racial microassaults might include someone using pejorative language towards a person of color. Microinsults are those messages that are subtle in nature and serve to put down a person's racial identity. A case in point might be an experience that I had approximately 10 years ago, right before I started my social work program at the University of Illinois. I was at a wedding with a friend, and she introduced me to another attendee of the wedding. We were talking about current events in our life, and I shared with her that I was excited about getting ready to start my graduate program at the U of I. When she asked me what program and I shared with her it was the School of Social Work, her response was, "How did you get into the School of Social Work?" My perception of that question and the tone and way in which it was asked was that her intended message was, "Oh, they must have just needed the numbers," as though my acceptance was related to affirmative action. That could be an example of a micro insult. The third form of microaggression is a microinvalidation. Microinvalidations are also subtle in nature, and they seek to deny a person's lived experience. An example of this might be when a person of color is asked, "No, no, no, where are you really from?" It's these last 2 forms of microaggressions that lead to what Daryl Wing Sue calls the catch-22. The catch-22 is Sue's way of describing the process that occurs to the person of color after experiencing a microaggression. It's basically a 5-step process that looks like this. The first thing that happens is attributional ambiguity, where the receiver of the message questions, "Did that really just happen? Was that what I think it was?" After they process that question, they move into response and decision. So what's the best way that I can respond here? And if I do respond, is the person going to be defensive? After processing that piece, we recognize the time-limited nature of responding. "Oh God, I've thought about this for too long. Is it too late to respond now?" Then there's a denying of the experiential reality. That didn't just happen. Surely that statement was not because of XYZ. And finally, there's an impotency of action, where the thought is, it doesn't matter whether I respond or not, nothing's going to change anyway. So let me share a brief anecdote where we can put this into a lived experience. I have a colleague that works at a community college not too far from where I live, and one day she had stopped at the grocery store to pick up some formula for her new baby, and as she was checking out and the cashier was ringing her up, without even looking up, the cashier asked her, "Are you going to use Link to pay for that?" Now, the assumption here, and this is based on a number of issues, largely because of how we as a society look at the Black female body, but also because of race and gender issues that are prominent in our geographic area. So there's several reasons why the cashier would just make an assumption that Link or what others might just know as TANF assistance or WIC or assistance for buying formula for their children on a government program is the reason why she would ask that. So the cashier says, "Are you going to use Link to pay for that?" And my colleague, who is a sociology instructor, had just got done teaching a race and ethnicity class. had to go through this process. And she thought to herself, surely she did not just ask me that. How am I going to respond? She must not know who I am. You know what? Now that I've thought about it, the time has been too long. And really, she probably didn't mean anything by it. And if she did, how would my response even change how she's thinking? So she decided to let it go. Now imagine going through that process on a day in, day out basis and what the implications of that might be for you as an individual. To give you an idea of what that would be like on a day-to-day basis, experiencing microaggressions have been equated to um, experiencing bee stings over and over and over again, which leads to trauma of various sorts. And what the research consistently shows is that the microaggression related trauma experienced by people of color have very harmful physical, emotional, social, and psychological effects. Physical effects have been linked with increased instances of hypertension, pain disorders, and fatigue. Emotional effects have been linked to depression and anxiety symptoms. Social effects include those of isolation, and the psychological effects are those of decreased senses of efficacy, locus of control, and confidence. So, although microaggressions are typically less obvious in nature, the effects are really quite real. Sue et al. Posits the nature of microaggressions can be more harmful than overt racism, and Salazano, Ceja, and Yoso suggest the effects can be so extreme as to cause a shortened lifespan. Be advised, it is not the occurrence of one or two microaggressions that can have these effects. It is the repeated exposure to such humiliation and degradation that will wear on the receiver. The receiver of these aggressions must question multiple times a day, not just if the incident occurred, but how she will respond to it. The result is often one of frustration and drained energy, to say the least. And yes, over time, it is indeed devastating. So let's bring it back to the Black female faculty experience and connect all of these dots. Due to the ways in which race and gender are socialized in America, the presence of Black female faculty in the front of the classroom can challenge the perspectives of students. Just as race and gender inform how Black female faculty operate in these learning spaces, so too does it impact how students operate in the same spaces. Using the critical race theory framework, the understanding of implicit bias, and the active engagement of microaggressions, we can begin to see how learning spaces are impacted when Black female faculty are present. And there are some questions that we must ask. Who is the ownership of the dialogue taking place in these arenas? Does it lie with the faculty of color or with those who challenge it? Should it not be inclusive so that all are heard? Whose narrative is of value? Should not all contributors to the learning space have a voice at the table? Instead, what the research has shown is that Black female faculty are more likely to have their authority and knowledge challenged by students than their white counterparts. These encounters detract from the learning experience by decreasing feelings of teaching efficacy, classroom control, and job satisfaction. And the students are not immune. Students of color will see these microaggressions that are sent to the instructor and feel the same effects, as though living vicariously through the faculty member. If the faculty of color does not or cannot address the aggression, the people of color are invalidated and the white students receive the unspoken message that they can continue to engage in status quo behavior. So, what are the options for addressing microaggressions volleyed at Black female faculty? Well, at the individual level, in response to the daily verbal attacks called microaggressions endured both in and out of their classes, Black female faculty have engaged in self-protective behavior, such as forming academic and social counterspaces on and off their campuses. These counterspaces allow a positive collegiate racial climate to be created and sustained, offering a compassionate arena where counter stories can be shared, frustrations can be expressed, and solutions can be brainstormed. Counter spaces may include offices or break rooms on campuses or coffee houses, or even the personal homes of the faculty off campus. In the classroom, as mentioned earlier, the sense of frustration and fatigue resulting from racial microaggressions can leave people of color discouraged and feeling negative. This, in turn, can easily impact efficacy both in and out of the classroom. Black female faculty must be careful to address microaggressions in a way that will not harm the classroom environment, but can create a supportive space for all of their students. And at the institutional level, the research shows that faculty retention rates are affected when Black female faculty experience microaggressions in the classroom. Combined with the health impacts described earlier, these effects accumulate over time, exponentially increasing the likelihood of burnout and eventual job transition. In fact, Black female faculty are 24% more likely to vacate their teaching positions than their white peers. This revolving door, in turn, impacts student retention rates. Campus leadership must validate the lived experiences of all of their faculty, not just the dominant experience. Leadership should work to have policies in place that will support Black female faculty. In addition to establishing policies, action should be taken to educate college faculty and staff regarding the same. For instance, is there a clear understanding of the institution's affirmative action policies, or even what affirmative action really means? There are typically several leaders at an educational institution that can impact policy. Specifically, before we conclude, we will look at one suggested strategy that chief academic officers can use to create supportive environments for their Black female faculty. As long as Black female faculty feel unsupported in the classroom, their productivity is affected. As such, it's the institution's duty to respond to this call of action to assist Black female faculty with addressing the biases that play out in their classrooms. Community college provosts, also known as chief academic officers, are in unique positions to hold the coordinators of on-campus faculty mentoring programs accountable for continued professional development. Research suggests that mentoring programs are quite successful when the goals include supporting faculty with learning institutional processes, creating interdepartmental rapport, and/or general feelings of belonging. However, data also asserts that when support is needed addressing gendered racial stereotypes that are expressed to the Black female faculty in the classroom, such programs have limited effectiveness. Mentors assigned to Black female faculty are not always people of color, nor should they be, and they do not always understand the intricacies of the Black female experience. Therefore, this practice should be examined to address this concern. The approach to faculty-focused mentoring must take into consideration the holistic needs of the faculty it is meant to support. Suggested adjustments to existing mentoring programs include requiring training that educates faculty mentors about the Black female experience. They may do this by engaging in conversation with Black female faculty to gather anecdotal evidence, reading texts that provide theoretical knowledge regarding the socialization of Black females in America, Teach mentors how to recognize the continued effect of institutional isms and the ways in which they play out in learning spaces. This can be done by engaging in dialogue. Provide ongoing trainings to increase awareness of issues directly related to diversity and inclusion. This can be accomplished by listening. In validating the Black female experience and educating mentors who are responsible for providing direct support, institutions become empowered to make their respective learning spaces much more dynamic and productive. During this time of limited educational resources, shrinking enrollments, and the growing costs of education, it would be beneficial for administrative stakeholders to take note of the costs associated with this phenomenon. Not only do microaggressions impact the retention of Black female faculty due to their psychological effects of continued exposure, they also impact the student learning environment for the same reason. If attention is paid, learning institutions will be able to reap the multitude of benefits seen within a diverse workplace. Some of these benefits include a meeting of the minds, where a variety of perspectives are reflected, which can be increasingly important for problem solving. An additional benefit is that of a reflection of the broader society. The more diverse your staff and faculty, the more likely your students are going to be able to relate to those present on your campuses. It's also important as it relates to representation, and it's especially significant in all levels of the educational experience. So not just necessarily in your faculty and staff, but also in your student body. It increases productivity and morale, improves work and community relations, and it allows everyone to function at their full potential. More importantly, not only will the benefits of a diverse workplace be seen, the benefits of an inclusive learning community will be seen.